Hello, I'm Henry, and I read a book, and my glasses are still on. Jesus. Hello, I'm Henry, and I read a book. I read this book, Storm of Swords Part 1, Steel and Snow by George R.R. Martin, and I would like to talk about it, please. Right, a bit of housekeeping to start with. This is my copy of Storm of Swords that I purchased with my own money. It's part of this really cool set of A Song of Ice and Fire. They're sort of leather bound and the pages are really thin like a Bible's. I mean, they're so thin that this is only half of this. I mean, look at that. I remember buying this and being a little hesitant at the time. I was thinking, maybe don't get it, because when Winds of Winter comes out and I get that, it won't match. Well, it's been many years and that isn't a problem I've had to face. I found this copy of A Storm of Swords on the pavement next to a bin in Finsbury Park. Not the park itself, just the area of North London. I'd just been out with some mates and we'd just left this kind of dodgy but also kind of good pub. It was weird, it was an Arsenal pub. I try not to go into those if I can help it, so maybe they're all like that. We're walking back to the station and I accidentally kick something that's on the floor. I look down and it's a book. It's this book, a book I already own and I've already read twice. The universe presented me with this book not long after starting a YouTube channel that deals in part with books. Why? Well, that's what this video is about. So I read this book. I already knew the story, so I wasn't reading it for that. I read it for the signs. I read every chapter, keeping a particular eye out for characters in those chapters looking for something or finding something, and seeing if there were any parallels or equivalents to me finding this book, looking for a meaning in this turn of events. First though, mini review. What is there to say that hasn't already been said about A Song of Ice and Fire? It's amazing. The first book, A Game of Thrones, is probably my second favourite book of all time. The characters, the world, the dialogue, the intrigue, the violence, the magic, it's all beautiful. They do get a bit not aimless, but they do lose their way slightly towards A Dance with Dragons, with a lot of sprawling running in place. But even then, it's so well written that you don't really notice or care, and this book, Storm of Swords, is still miles away from any of that. It's tight, it's sharp, and despite going in a million different directions, it does have clear and solid direction, if that makes any sense. Something important happens in nearly every single chapter, be it plot-wise, character-wise, world-wise, that moves everything forward in a satisfying way. It is in a constant state of progression, motion, and building. It's rare to feel a sense of relief when a chapter ends. There's no like, oh, thank God that's over, let's get back to the good stuff. I do have favourite characters, of course. Tyrion becoming bitter and angry about being underappreciated and overlooked is perfectly done. Davos's unfailing loyalty to Stannis the Manis is something to behold. And there's something very slice of life and relaxing about the Sansa chapters, despite the awful situation she's actually in. There were a few Dany or Bran chapters that I didn't enjoy as much, or that sort of stalled the momentum and the motion, and Sam's cowardly whining does get to you a bit. But that stuff is in the vast minority. Jon's adventures with the wildlings are great. The complex and important politics of Catelyn's time at Riverrun were compelling. The Jaime Brienne buddy cop dynamic really works. Arya's time in the wild is a really good look at how war affects common people. It's all so good. It stops at a good point as well, I should say. I mentioned that this is only half of A Storm of Swords, but it doesn't feel like an abrupt, sheer cut-off point. It obviously doesn't feel like the end of the book, but it doesn't feel unnatural or forced either. I mean, if you haven't read this series, get on it. The only real problem with it is the ending it looks like we are never going to get. I am more than happy to be proven wrong here. I won't mind at all a copy of Winds of Winter that don't match my leather-bound set. I want this video to age poorly. For the moment though, I can understand how going into a story knowing there is no ending can be a put-off. But hey, I'd say no ending is infinitely preferable to the alternative. Okay, that's my thoughts on the book. Let's get to this search for greater meaning in what was obviously just a coincidence. So, as I said in the overview, how this is going to work is by going chapter by chapter, looking at exactly what the characters are doing in those chapters, seeing if they are searching for anything or if they find anything. And if they do, seeing if I can draw a parallel from that to myself finding a book next to a bin in North London. The prologue. The brothers of the Night's Watch are looking for a bear, but unfortunately they do not find it. Probably for the best. I'm not sure how I could draw a parallel from a bear to a book. Both start with B, I suppose. Jaime 1. The main characters of this chapter, Jaime, Brienne, and Cleos Frey, aren't really looking for anything, but there are people looking for them. And they find them. Brienne wrecks them in quick order, but they do find what they are looking for. Okay, what can we decipher from this? Well, in this scenario, I would be Sir Robin Ryger, the person who finds the thing. That's this guy. And I mean, his face is a little less chubby than mine, but other than that, I think we're pretty much the same. And if I'm this guy, that makes the book Jaime Lannister. Robin is trying to bring Jaime back to the Riverrun dungeon. Is me taking this book home damning it to imprisonment? I've never really thought of ownership of objects quite like that before. Let's put a pin in this for now and explore the ramifications in further detail if we can't find anything better. Nothing much in Catelyn 1 or Tyrion 1, but we do get something good in Davos 1. The Onion Knight has washed up on a big spike of rock sticking out of the ocean. The Battle of Blackwater Bay has just gone very badly for Team Stannis. Now, the majority of this chapter is Davos sort of just arguing with himself about drinking seawater, but at the very end, Davos is found by a friendly ship. It is a completely serendipitous encounter, much like the finding of a book next to a bin. Davos is very much an open book of a character, and as much of a reach as that sounds, I don't think it's one. He's honest at all times, and he's very straightforward with how he feels and what he wants. And this book has been battered and maimed and maybe even burnt a little bit, much like the fingerless Davos Seaworth. The only issues with this are the people who found him. I can't really draw any parallels to them, the pirates themselves or the king Davos is brought to. I mean, Stannis and me do have similarly strong hairlines, but Stannis doesn't really do anything with Davos except putting him in a cell and then making him his hand of the king. As much as I'd like an inanimate object to run the finer points of my life, I don't really think that's a good idea. In Sansa 1, she meets with Olenna and Marjorie Tyrell. In Jon 1, he meets with Mance Rayder. In Dany 1, she is on a boat. And in Bran 1, he decides to learn magic. Now to report here. So we've just ruled out anything to do with Davos, so that brings us to Jaime 2. In this chapter, we get Jaime's perspective on the events leading up to Robert's rebellion and the sack of King's Landing, though not in full detail. That comes later. The key event here is one man finding another man sitting on a chair. Eddard Stark finds Jaime Lannister sitting on the Iron Throne. Now, in Eddard's eyes and the eyes of the rest of the kingdom, this is seen as an act of defiance, which would be a really cool parallel to draw with this book. It defiantly soldiered on. In the face of a cold night and drunken revelers, it sat there on the pavement, unmoving and strong. However, we find out in this chapter that Jaime didn't really sit on the throne for that reason. It was more, at least that's what he thinks, it could be an unreliable narration type thing. Indifference. He just didn't really care about anything at that point. He wanted to sit down and it happened to be the only chair in the room. Indifference is a less triumphant trait than defiance to try to superimpose onto this book situation. It works with the book being indifferent to the world around it, but it's not quite as poetic. I am also no Ned Stark. He was all honor and no humor. I am the other way around. Plus, he doesn't really do anything with Jaime except judge him, and doing that with books based on how they look is something people tell you to not do. So in this scenario, it would be like if I saw the book, deemed it not good enough for me to bend down and pick up, and just left it there. This whole thing doesn't quite work. Tyrion finds something in his second chapter, though something that will not keep this video PG-13. And Catelyn, in her second chapter, found out that Robb found the same thing and basically lost the war because of it. And Jon 2 is set up for him finding that same thing too, which he does in his later chapters, frequently. Sometimes with his mouth. Scandalous as that may be, I think it means we can rule out the Jon chapters. Sansa gets measured for a dress, Sam kills an other, Tyrion gets betrothed, and Catelyn watches Robb cut some dudes' heads off. I feel like you could read one-line summaries of all the chapters in this book like in a row, and it'd go really well to the tune of It's the End of the World as We Know It. Back to Jaime now, and he is found again. Now at this point, we've pretty much ruled out any parallels between the book and the Kingslayer. However, we can further rule out any deeper meaning in this chapter, as the people who find him cut his hand off. I am those people in this instance. And I know I mentioned I had no honor earlier, but I don't think I would ever intentionally damage a book in any way. Dany views some slaves, Bran hears the story of the tourney at Harrenhal, Dany buys some slaves. Sansa gets married to Tyrion, Jaime gets some much needed medical attention, and Tyrion politics. Sam is witness to a mutiny, Catelyn's dad dies, and Jaime delivers an epic monologue in a bath. Tyrion meets Oberyn, and then we finally get another instance of a character finding something. Bran and his squad reach Queen's Crown, an old holdfast on an island that a queen visited once, only accessible by a submerged walkway. They find this walkway. So I am a crippled boy with magical powers, and the book is a partially submerged path across a lake. I think I might be stretching the premise of this video a little too far here. You want to leave this one? Yeah, let's just leave this one. Now, that was the last chapter of this book that we needed to look at. Remember, this is only half of A Storm of Swords. But before we have to accept that I am a fat, bald man dooming a piece of printed medium to imprisonment, there is something I should probably mention. You may have noticed it already, but for those who haven't, I haven't mentioned Arya Stark yet. I have conveniently skipped over all of her chapters for the sake of pacing and structure in the video, because her chapters have the answer to all of this. Her chapters have the true parallel. Her chapters have the reason why I found this book. Arya starts this book having just escaped from Harrenhal. She, Gendry, and the Shrouded Lord are attempting to get to Riverrun and are looking for one of the forks of the Trident River. They do not find one. Instead, some people find them. It's a band of sort of Robin Hood-esque outlaws called the Brotherhood Without Banners. However, it isn't all of them. The whole group is splintered across the countryside, and it's one of these splinters that takes in Arya, with the intention of ransoming her back to her family. However, before they do that, they have to meet up with their boss. They spend a good few chapters looking for this guy, and eventually they find him. Beric Dondarrion, the Lightning Lord. Now, Beric is a pretty interesting character because he has died several times, and each time he is brought back to life by R'hllor, a god of fire and lord of light. And herein lies the true meaning. They find a man who's been brought back to life. I found a book whose life was over. In the morning, the street cleaners would have picked it up and put it in the bin, and that would have been that. But I brought it back. I gave it another life, just like R'hllor gave Beric Dondarrion another life. The parallels are right here and undeniable. The book is Beric Dondarrion, and I am R'hllor. I am the Lord of Light. This is what the universe was telling me when I found this book on that cold winter's night. I am the Lord of Light. Cards on the table, I know why I really found this book. What probably happened was someone wanted to donate it to a charity shop, but it was shut, so they just left it outside. And then some tosser, probably an Arsenal fan, saw it and thought, I'll have that, and picked it up. Then they got bored of carrying it down the street, decided to chuck it, and they missed the bin. I'd say that's probably the most likely sequence of events that led to me finding this book, with no higher or deeper meaning present. But just in case, I wouldn't rule out the possibility that I am some sort of fire god with the power of revivification. Hello everyone, thanks a lot for getting to the end of the video. No more updates here or anything to let you know about, just like and subscribe and all that. And the next video will be the last Scott Pilgrim one, so I'll see you in that. Cheers!